we are. Can you hear me over there, Lee?
Yeah.
All right.
Works. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, hello, everybody. And we want to welcome you to another edition of the Spirit of Science. Lee, how many is that we've done so far? I ask that every
Stop
time.
asking me.
This is like the 213th show that we've done. It kind of feels like it sometimes.
Yeah.
But I want to say hello to everybody. It is May 12th. May 12th was my grandma's birthday. She would have been
Oh, cool.
113 years old, maybe? Yeah, about 113, 114 years old. So happy birthday up in heaven, Grandma. And
Maybe she's reincarnated.
maybe she's reincarnated. Yeah, maybe she is. But hey, we want to thank everybody. Who do we got in here? We got 15 people watching so
Nice.
far.
Awesome.
So we want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. And if anybody has any questions or comments, we've got a Q&A tab, and you can also shoot us a message somehow while we're doing the show. I'll try and figure out if you guys are being blocked or not from shooting us a message. Hopefully not. But yeah, thanks everybody. Tonight we're going to be talking about reincarnation. But before we get started, as usual, we want to send out our plea for people to contribute something to the Merchant's House to help us fight the nasty developers who are right next door, and they want to put up a big nasty hotel right next to the Merchant's House. Now, which would be catastrophic to the Merchant's House. This Merchant's House here has been around, was built in 1832. And you can see in the background, everything in these parlors is original to the house. And we have beautiful, maybe our cameraman can hit some of the molding up there. Yeah, all that molding, everything, all the vibrations. The Merchant's House has had engineers do these experiments and run these tests. And they've concluded that any kind of construction next to the Merchant's House would just destroy the Merchant's House. And we don't want to do that. Merchant's House is a jewel here in New York City. It really is a time capsule. So we don't want any kind of nasty hotel next to us. We don't want to encourage more people to come to New York City. There's too many people in New York City as it is. It's so crowded and it's getting hot. I don't do well in the heat, and I don't like tourists in the heat. So please contribute to the Merchant's House. Come by, take a tour, take a ghost tour. All the money, 100% of the money that you guys spend on the Merchant's House goes directly to the Merchant's House. We're all volunteers here. We don't take any kind of money. We don't take any kind of payment, nothing, nada. All the money goes to the Merchant's House to keep the Merchant's House up and running. And as lovely as it is. So thank you in advance for doing that. And we're just going to get started with the show. Of course, I'm here with my good friend and possibly my grandmother reincarnated, Matilda Garrido. And as usual, off camera, we've got the enigmatic Dr. Lee, or Captain Dr. Lee, we're going to call him now. He just came back from a sailing trip. And good time, Lee?
Yeah.
What happened to the tan, man? Where's the tan?
I always get sunburned every time I go to the aquarium, so I was just being very, very careful. Long sleeves,
That's
sunscreen,
smart.
everything. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, so reincarnation. Reincarnation. Reincarnation, reports of reincarnation have been around since people have been able to report anything. People there have been stories of reincarnation that have been told coming down through the ages, and many cultures across the world really embrace reincarnation, and they don't look at it as some kind of taboo or pseudoscience.
No, it's a deeply held religious belief.
Right.
Mostly in the Asian world.
Sure.
Hindu, Buddhist, Jainism, they all believe in the reincarnation.
For some reason here in the States, it is looked at as, if you bring up your reincarnation, people are going to look at you a little funny. There's not, I'm sure there are people with more ghost stories than reincarnation stories, but what I have learned, and when I got into the paranormal, when I started investigating a long time ago, it would come up, and I didn't know anything about it, and I still don't know a lot about it. But I discovered at the University of Virginia, there was a Dr. Stevenson was doing a lot of research and Dr. Stevenson has passed away, but his protege, his name is Jim Tucker, is continuing that research down at the University of Virginia. And they have come up with some pretty amazing examples of what they believe is a legit reincarnation, I guess, scenario, where people have had past life memories. These young children have had past life memories. Now, the age where they start having them is, we're going to play a video later on, is young, 2, 3, 4, 5, and really when children can start to communicate what they're experiencing, parents would hear these crazy stories. You know, what is my kid talking about, and how is this happening? This great video we're going to play later on, the family really rode this out and tried to figure out what was going on, and they've got some great answers. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it's really, really good. And I know you've done a lot of research on this.
Well, I have done some, yeah. And actually, to children speaking of past lives, it's very common in India, and it's really part of the culture. And frequently, if a child talks about living in another part of India or with another family, the child will be taken there and they will visit. It's really very, very interwoven into the fabric of their society. What I think is interesting about religions that believe in reincarnation and ones that don't is that in religions that believe in reincarnation, what you do is like your responsibility. So your next life, whatever form you're reincarnated into, is based on your actions in your previous life.
Is it like like all of your cumulative actions in all your previous lives, or just like the previous life?
Well, there's like a moving through of layers. You know, it's very
but I wonder if it's like a, almost like a running average, or if it's just like every life.
No,
is its
if
own
you ascend,
assessment
you either ascend or descend.
per life. They just evaluate that life, and it's like, okay, you're cool in this life. We don't care that you were Hitler in the previous life, so you're good.
Well, I think because I think you can, the whole point is to
It's like
reach a point
evolution.
where you are not reincarnated.
Yeah,
anymore.
exactly. Yeah, which is interesting. Is
yeah.
that in all of the religions that believe in reincarnation, or only, like, I know that's the case in like Buddhism, right?
Yes, ultimately,
But
yes, in all
like,
of them it is to
Hinduism,
become
everything.
one with God or
Huh.
the force of the universe. That's the ultimate goal.
Cool.
But for the Judeo-Christian religions, we are judged by an external force, right? So like we are not reincarnated, we have just this one chance, and then we're gonna, theoretically go someplace based on what we did.
But in like Hindu and Buddhism, like there's not an external force, it's just like it's some kind of like internal thing.
Well, it's karma. It's all based on karma, and it's very complex. It's not as simple as like, it really isn't as straightforward. Sometimes you're reincarnated into an animal form. Sometimes you're not reincarnated into a form at all. You just sort of spend some time in a realm, and then you might come back.
But it's just like it's almost seen as like there's just like a machine that like processes you after you die, decides.
It's you.
Okay,
you're
so your
the
internal,
deciding factor.
yeah.
There isn't someone external judging
Got it,
your
that's what you
actions.
meant. Oh, yeah, okay.
Your actions determine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, but it's complex. I mean, some Buddhists don't believe that you're actually reincarnated into a form. It's what lives on is your karma, right? So your karma is what is reincarnated, but it's not you. It's what you have created. Yeah. But
interesting.
Yeah. If anybody knows like more specifics, please write in, because like I said, it's extremely complicated.
Yeah. So like what you were saying before, if we're the people that make the choice on whether or not we're going to be reincarnated.
No, we don't make the choice,
okay,
but we make the choice through our actions about what's going to happen to us next. Like if you are, in a very simplistic way, if you are like a bad person and commit murder and steal and things like that, you're shaping your own next life.
Okay. Well, all right, just to play the opposite side, when you're doing that, I'm sure some people don't know that they're being bad. Somebody say who,
Yeah, it might be about intent.
Yeah.
It might be intent based rather
Yeah.
than consequence
Because then
based.
who's the judge to decide, okay, you can be reincarnated or you can't be? because
Yeah,
you're
I
not
just
cool.
looked
Yeah,
into
I
this,
don't
and you're
know.
right,
Yeah.
it's vague, but like, I looked into, so somebody asked like, how is karma determined? And basically, you're saying karma results as not as a judgment imposed by God, like you said, or other all-powerful beings, but rather by the results of a natural process. So it's just kind of like a law of the universe that just
Sure.
kind of like assesses, but it's not like an entity that does it. It's just kind of like a law of physics, kind of like gravity, I guess, that just kind of, it just happens, like depending on how you were in that previous life. It's not some person with an intelligence that's deciding, what's happening.
Right, right. I think what's interesting about the children in America or in England or other, Christian or Judeo-Christian nations is there doesn't seem to be a sort of they're not on a trajectory to like go higher, because frequently, like the case that we'll look at, the James Leininger case, I guess he is better off than the person who died that he became reincarnated from. But it's not it's not like he was a beggar and then he was a really kind person and did really good and then was reincarnated as a prince or anything like that. Or like, there wasn't like a sort of a hierarchy. It
I
doesn't
wonder
seem
though, like what that trajectory is. Like, is it like the better you are, like the better off you are in the next life? Because the better off you are in the next life, actually, a lot of times is probably detrimental to like a spiritual evolution. It's like if you're a beggar and you're a really nice person and then you die and you become like a billionaire in the next life, you're probably going to be like a dick. And
Right.
like you're going to go back down, it's actually harder. So I
well,
wonder.
maybe you're
direction.
presented with more options for choice. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like you have
Interesting.
the whole point is like you choose.
Yeah, okay.
You make your choices and there are consequences to your choices.
Jeez, what the hell did I do? Oh, man.
But that's what I'm saying. Like your
Yeah.
current situation might actually be like, everybody's current situation. It might almost be the opposite or not in any way really related to like
Right.
how good you were in the previous life. It's all just kind of like maybe the worse off you are, the better you were in the previous life or something. I don't know. Exactly.
Yeah, and if you're going to be reincarnated, and let's just say you were, a beggar or somebody, down on their luck, but really, really nice and giving, and why would they change you?
That's what I mean.
Exactly.
Like,
why would you come back? You just come back as a beggar again.
Exactly. Maybe you get to come back as a friggin' animal or a rock where you're even more kind of at peace.
What would you want to come back as if you were an animal? I mean, sorry.
No, an animal is actually a downgrade.
Really?
Supposedly,
No.
yeah. I mean, I hesitate to talk about this
Except
because I
dogs.
don't want to appear
What?
culturally.
Except dogs.
No.
Dog is the pinnacle.
No, but you're thinking like a eagle or a bear,
Right.
I would love to.
Yeah, they
I
seem
don't
more at peace with, like, they're not bad, they're not evil, they're not, you would think, they're not doing bad things. They're just going around like eating things when they need to, and so, like they're not.
I know, and I suppose the argument could be made that animals are actually
Yeah,
purer
exactly.
intent,
Yeah,
but
that's what I
that's
mean,
from what I've read, that's not that it is a downgrade.
That's weird. Yeah. So maybe it's like you said, like it's kind of like those tests, like the online tests for like, if you answer correctly, the next question is harder. If you answer incorrectly, the next question is easier. So maybe it's like, oh, you passed being an eagle. Okay, but that's freaking easy. Okay, now you're a billionaire, and like try that out. Then if you become a dick, then like, okay, back down to something else that's easier.
I wonder if animals are a downgrade because animals have less ability to make choices.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Exactly.
So the whole thing is like you rise higher and higher based upon the choices
the
that
test
you
is
make.
greater and greater as you evolve, and then when you're finally like past the final test of like you could have done anything in your life, but you decided to be a good person, then you finally go into wherever you go and don't reincarnate.
Yeah, and I don't want to be culturally insensitive, and I don't really know this, but I feel like I have heard that in some places in India, you're not meant to help beggars because they are working something out, right? So maybe you are reborn and it's actually, you're just clearing something by being reborn into a life of suffering.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, it's complex.
It is complex.
Because you have to think about, I mean, just like, Christianity and other religions where you try to balance like what the religion says versus like if you try to think about it logically, like they don't necessarily reconcile that well.
But then does that mean everybody that passes away is reincarnated?
No, ultimately you don't. Ultimately, you hit the highest point and then you just exist at one with the,
But in
ultimate
general,
God.
yeah, like probably 99% of people, when you die, you are reincarnated until
Right.
you reach that peak of.
But I wonder what the trigger is for somebody to then have a past life memory. You know,
so they
because I
fade
mean, I don't,
supposedly, they
I didn't
fade.
have any.
They fade.
Yeah,
Children
yeah,
have them, and
Uh-huh.
then by the age of 10, the memories fade.
Right,
They
right.
just won't even remember telling their parents about it or anything. Yeah,
Right,
it just goes away.
Right. And sometimes also they'll have physical
Like
scars or
birthmarks,
birthmarks that
right, yeah, I've read that.
correspond
I've read a lot of a University of Virginia's files. You can go online and you can find a lot of them, and
yeah.
you know, people have, in India especially, he focused a lot of his attention on reincarnation cases in India. And he would bring a child to a town and he would know how to get around. He would know people by name.
Yeah,
He'd say, that was my wife.
yeah,
That was my kids. Those
Yeah.
were my kids.
yeah.
And after conversations, you know, because I guess in that culture, it is sort of hardwired in these people to believe in reincarnation. They buy it. They go, yeah.
Well, it's
yeah.
not unusual. This happens
Right.
all the time.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not considered strange if your child starts talking about things like
Well, I
that.
mean, or a stranger coming from another town, a little 10-year-old saying,
Right.
hey, Matilda, we were married. You were my wife.
Right.
What would you ask him to be sure?
What would I ask him?
Yeah, we'd say, okay, well, if we were really married, you would know
Oh,
the answer
no,
to that.
now I'm like, what's
Any
the host of the
tattoos
new
that
one?
nobody knows about, or?
What's my favorite color?
You have a tattoo on your lower back.
But that birthmark thing is
Mhm.
intriguing.
Yeah.
Like I remember reading one or two of those files where it's like really strange birthmarks too. It's like a spot on like both sides of the head, and then like you know,
Right,
the
and
person's
favorite
having dreams of
foods,
being,
favorite
like,
types of
shot in the head
music.
or something. Or,
Yeah,
Yeah.
favorite foods, favorite type of music, which reminds me, we're people who receive transplants and
Oh, yeah, I've
you
heard this
develop
too.
characteristics of the donor.
Yeah.
Where, you know, say that, you know, the donor was really into French food or whatever, and suddenly the person that receives the organ, you know, has desire for French food.
So
or
I read a study that actually looked into that,
Mhm.
and actually, at least that this one study, they found like there was actually like no,
really?
in general, you know,
Oh,
obviously
bummer.
there might be examples where that might happen, but
Right.
like, yeah, when they found that there was no correlation, like people were like, oh, you know, I'm more into whatever. And then when they secretly kind of looked back into the history of where that organ came from and they asked how that person was, like there was no good correlation.
Mhm.
But that was just the one study that I read,
Right.
so who knows? But
Right, because, you know, that idea of that happening, you know, we all have our DNA, we all have our history, and it's programmed into us.
yeah.
And if somehow, you know, we receive some kind of DNA from somebody else, I mean, we have dead skin cells, you know, we're all breathing in, the three of us are dead skin cells,
Yeah.
you know. I've got a little bit of Lee inside of me, a little bit of, you know, Matilda inside. I mean, does that mean possibly we could maybe have some of those memories? Is that what's maybe happening, or, you know,
Yeah,
that's
you're getting into
far
like
out there.
Well,
what
this is the
possible
basis of, and
mechanisms.
what's now called inherited trauma. You know, that very famous study, I don't know if you heard about it, about children who were born to women who had been through a famine, and not, it wasn't Denmark, but it was in some, so those children actually stored fat more efficiently than other children that weren't, because they had inherited a deprivation.
Yeah, and that can be explains, you know, biologically, you know, because you do get the blood from your mother and you get proteins, then, and your diet is absolutely influencing your child's potential future diet and, like, you know, body and everything, because of exactly, like, it makes sense too, like for your body to, every time a new person's born, they're born into an environment that might be, you know, you don't know what it is. So if you're born to a parent that lives in like a desert, it's good if your body is sort of pre-tuned to that kind of scenario. Or if you're born to somebody that lives in the Arctic, it's better if you're pre-tuned in some way to that. So some of that's like through genetics and evolution, but some of it is also just through like, you know, it's called epigenetics.
Yes.
Which, exactly. So that just it's other factors that can help turn on or off certain genes that are already in your DNA.
Right.
But like not all your genes are necessarily being used in your life or anybody's life. So epigenetics helps determine which ones get turned on and which ones get turned off. And that can even happen throughout your life too, after birth. Your diet and like even your biome of like bacteria that live in your intestines and everything, they can all influence that too. So yeah, that is, so I mean, right now we're getting to, you know, think of like what might be the mechanism by which like this information is transferred, you know?
Right.
And yeah, it's like the information has to, by definition, have been transferred somehow from like person A's brain to person B's
like on a
brain.
cellular level, memories are.
Yeah, so like the place where those types of memories, like long-term memories, are stored in the brain, it's called the hippocampus.
Right.
And that's you know, the way the memories are stored in the hippocampus, it's thought, just like every memory and basically everything in the brain is through they're called like essentially weights between the connections between different neurons. So neurons is just a big network, and they're connected to a whole bunch of other neurons around them. But then each connection is like slightly more powerful or less powerful than each other, right? So it actually, that's what like neural networks, like artificial intelligence, a lot of that is based off of that kind of idea. So in a computer, you can basically just simulate, you make this kind of mesh of different little nodes that are kind of based off of the neurons in your brain. And between all those nodes, they're all connected at the start. And then as you train it, each of those connections learns to be like, oh, this connection between node A and B is going to be a little more strong. Between A and C, it's going to be a little weaker. And if you have this big enough web, it essentially can act like a brain. You know, that's part of how AI works.
Right.
And you just train those connections, and you create this like intricate mesh of different values of weights between those different nodes.
So I could see like if that was going from parent to child, but if you're a child born to a family completely unrelated.
Exactly. Yeah. So like how that happens, that's a good question. And that's like maybe there's a portion of learning and memory that's transferred not through that kind of like neural connections, and maybe it happens through the soul transfer or whatever, you know.
Should we watch the video and then discuss?
Yeah,
it's a cool video.
Yeah. So I'm gonna share my screen, guys, and pull this up.
Go back to the beginning.
Yep. And this is young man named James Leininger. And it's probably, in the United States, California, I believe it's probably one of the most popular examples of reincarnation when people are proponents of reincarnation, and they say, okay, well, explain this. This is what they show them to. It's pretty remarkable stuff. So I'm going to start the video. Let's see, share my screen. Here we are, and just bear with me. Here we are.
A Louisiana boy offers incredible evidence that should satisfy both sides of the soul debate. His case offers proof that the soul is real, that it can be reincarnated, and that at the University of Virginia, a group of psychiatrists use science to unlock the secrets of reincarnation.
Just for a second.
Since the 1960s, the Perceptual Studies has been collecting cases of children who claim past life memories. They now have files on 2,500 children.
Well, I think what the research shows is that for people who are open to considering the possibility that there is evidence that consciousness at times can exist separately from a functioning brain. So in the cases of these children's reports, if you look at the best cases, they provide evidence that at times there can be this carryover of memories and emotions that seem carried over from one life and then continue on in another.
May 2000, Lafayette, Louisiana. A mother awakens to hear the screams of her 2-year-old son.
He was laying on his back and he was kicking his feet up like this and pounding his fists like this, just kicking and screaming at the top of his lungs.
Andrea Leininger cannot soothe her baby James. Eventually, he falls back to sleep. She thinks the nightmare is over, but really, it is just beginning.
Then the next night he had another one. It was the exact same thing, the same exact kicking motion. And the more he had it, the more bizarre it became because it was so specific and so repetitive.
This marked the start of one of the best documented cases of possible reincarnation in history.
Have you ever heard of people who can kneel to walk thousands of miles?
Sorry, everybody.
Pilgrims in Tibet make such pilgrimages several.
Today, James Leininger is 12.
I play sports, baseball, soccer, go to Ascension Episcopal School. I have a lot of friends there. The other kids, when they were younger, say, I want to be a fireman. I want to be an astronaut. But I was always, I want to be a fighter pilot. I want to be in the Marines. Oh, you got some cool pictures. Yeah. Oh, they came out nice.
From the age of 3, James's parents began to hear stories from their son that shocked them. That their son was recalling things that connected him to a Navy pilot who died in 1945. They were skeptical. Bruce is an HR manager in the oil industry. Andrea is a former ballerina turned instructor. As Christians, they never believed in reincarnation, but they began to piece together an amazing story. The first clue came from the terrifying, non-stop nightmares that James began having at the age of 2.
He was saying, airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out. Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out. That's when I was like, oh my God, is that what he's been dreaming this entire time?
What he was saying wasn't registering as much on me as what he was doing. He was flailing around in bed. And I remember the very specific thought I had at that point. This looks like The Exorcist. He was freaking out. I had this thought, he possessed. What is going on?
Within a year, the visions that greeted James in his nightmares began taking shape when he was wide awake.
I was reading to James, and then he sat up and he goes, Mama, the little man's going like this. And he laid down and he goes, and he did the same thing he did in his dream. He was kicking his feet up and he goes, the little man's going like this. Ooh, 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 can't get out, can't get out. And I sat him back up and I said, who's the little man? And he goes, me. It still makes my hair stand up. And Bruce said, what happened to your plane? And he said, it crashed on fire. And he said, why did your airplane crash? And he said, it got shot. Bruce said, who shot your plane? He went, oh, the Japanese.
James then gave his parents the next uncanny clue, one that was very specific. The name of a ship from which he says his aircraft took off.
So I said, well, did your boat have a name? And he said, Natoma. I've never heard the word before. And I went down the hall and got onto the computer and Googled it. And down around hit 300, all there was this thing, Natoma Bay CVE 62. Clicked on it, and up comes this history of a World War II aircraft carrier. And so that was the beginning of what the heck is going on here.
Standing there staring at this picture of this little, it was like an aerial photo of this little aircraft carrier in the water, and just stood there staring at it for a long time.
I had no answers. You know, how could he know this? How could he know a person? How could he know a ship? And what did all this mean? So that was where I really just said, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know what I'm going to find, but I'm not going to stop looking until I get as many answers as I can get.
This was enough to send Bruce on an investigation, doing his own research. Over the next 2 years, he learned about the men from the Natoma Bay, both living and dead. And James kept giving his parents additional, tantalizing, eerie clues.
Well, I kept asking him, do you remember what your name was? Do you remember what your name was? And he always said James. And I thought, well, he's 2, he's confused. He thinks I'm asking him what his name is.
Then James started drawing.
That was one of my mission things.
Mission thing. One of my favorite ones.
The same thing over and over, like a movie compressed all into one frame. An air battle. Flak. A plane on fire. And his signature, James 3.
So one day I was in the kitchen, I was washing dishes, James had breakfast, and in the airplane, he was just flying around like this. And he goes, Mama, before I was born, I was a pilot, and my airplane got shot in the engine and crashed in the water, and that's how I died. And I was just froze. It was such a bizarre thing to say, but it was just that matter of fact. There was no drama, there was no emotion to it.
At 3, James started pretending to be a pilot with an attention to detail that astonished his father.
One day he dragged a car seat into the closet in my office, and he set up a little cockpit in there. He had a little play school console, and it was going to be a cockpit, and he's going back and forth. All of a sudden, the door comes flying open, and he comes rolling out of it. I said, James, what happened to you? He says, I said, you fall? He says, no. He says, my plane got shot, and I bailed out.
The next breakthrough came when Bruce was invited to the Natoma Bay Veterans Reunion. He asked about the names of men killed in battle, and this led him to finally solving the mystery of James 3.
He called me on the phone and he said, you won't believe this, there's only one guy from Natoma Bay who was killed during the battle for Iwo Jima, and his name was James M. Houston Jr. And I said, wait, that would make our James 3. I was so excited. I'm like, that's it. I'm like, that's him. It's James M. Houston. His name is James 3.
James Houston Jr., World War II Navy pilot. At age 21, on March 3, 1945, his plane was shot down over Chichijima. Now, the skeptical parents were sitting on compelling proof that their little boy really was reincarnated.
This plane, the Wildcat, is the plane that James M. Houston crashed in. And he was a test pilot for Corsair. He would test fly those off of carriers. The F-18 is the plane I want to fly when I grow up.
Since he was 2, James showed an unusual fascination for military air shows and an uncanny familiarity with vintage aircraft. His parents cautiously made contact with James Houston's only surviving relative, his sister, Anne. At first, she didn't know what to think about the little boy who claimed to be her brother reincarnated. But then, James asked her for a painting that only one person other than her knew existed.
She sent this January 16th, 2006. Says, Dear James, I do hope that this is the picture you asked for. It is the only one of me done by my mother. I am sorry to be so long sending it to you. These past few weeks have been very busy and hectic. I hope you like it. With my love, Annie.
James believed then, as he does now, that it was the dead pilot's soul asking for that picture.
I had asked her for a painting that my past mother had done for her and me. This was in her attic for 50 or so years. My parents and she thought it was crazy that I would know about something like this.
Anne, too, became a believer. And there were other, more chilling connections. James had 3 G.I. Joes he named Billy, Walter, and Leon, names his parents thought were strange for a boy to choose.
Bruce is like, hey, James, what are you going to name your G.I. Joe? And he's just playing, he goes, Walter. So we were like, Walter? Bruce goes, how come you named your G.I. Joes Billy, Walter, and Leon? And he goes, because that's who met me when I got to heaven.
Okay, today is June 1st. You say your name and spell it. I'm God, G-O-D.
And it was one of the moments where like the blood drained out of our face, and we just kind of walked backwards. Bruce went in the office, I went in the office, we closed the door. He's in there going through papers like this. I'm like, what are you looking for? What are you looking for? He finds this piece of paper, and he says, Billy Peeler, Walter Devlin, and Leon Connor were all in the same squadron as James Houston. I was like, when did they die? Did they die before? Throwing papers around, pulls out another sheet, and he looked at the dates of death, and they all died before James Houston died.
They all flew with him.
Although James's dad remained skeptical that reincarnation might really be possible, what happened next was uncanny.
So we're cleaning up the yard, and he's playing in the leaves. I said, I just love you to bits. And he goes, well, he said, I knew you'd be a good daddy when I picked you. And I said, what? And he said, well, when I found you and mommy, I knew you would be good parents. My head was shrinking to the size of a raisin in my brain. I said, what do you mean when you found us? He said, well, I found you and mommy in Hawaii.
James told his father that he saw them in a pink hotel, which is where the Leiningers were staying when they decided to have James. Bruce and Andrea were cautious about asking doctors and psychiatrists for help. They decided to find their own solution to James's ordeal. And their solution was to go to Japan, to the very expansive ocean where the pilot, James Houston Jr., died.
Now you are the pilot of the Souls of Men.
The boat was right above where the wreckage of the plane was. And Bruce did this beautiful memorial service. And so I thought that was a perfect moment for me to just say, I sat down with him and I said, Jim Houston's been a part of your life for as long as we can remember. And he's always going to be an important part of who you are. But you have a life to live as James Leininger. And it's time for you to say goodbye to Jim Houston. And he just started bawling. And he cried for about 20 minutes.
He had
It
everyone
was
on
the
the
saddest
boat.
thing I ever seen.
He had everyone on the boat.
Crying.
Good job. Good boy.
Oh my God, I feel like I'm not crying.
You're such a brave soul. Such a brave soul and spirit.
It's weird when we got back to shore. It was something had changed.
He left something there.
He really did. It was palpable. You could see that he'd mourned that and everything that had happened and was ready to move on. And he really did at that point. That's kind of when everything really changed.
We're going to be the same thing that James M. Houston was, a pilot.
The next picture that James Leininger drew was one of peace. The nightmares stopped. The memories started to fade.
I don't want him to remember anything about his past life. He has a life, and I don't want him to be bogged down or confused or
He's our son. He's not Jim Houston.
got a life to live.
Today, James Leininger can remember nothing specific about the soul that used to torment him.
The spirit that I used to have when I was 4, 5, 6 has gone away. I'm just James now. It's not, I still have James Houston in me, I think, but it's not so much the bad history. It's more of the peaceful history of his life.
Interesting.
It's time for me to get set up for therapy, and I use this room as my office, but the desk is over here. And so when I'm
That's the
seated at the
next
desk,
video. Wow. Well,
Well, I
pretty
think
cool.
DOPS investigated that case, right? I mean, they were involved in it.
I think so, yeah, just in documenting it. And,
Mhm.
well, one thing that's interesting is like thinking back about like the potential mechanisms behind this and how things really work, like the delay between the time of death and the rebirth.
Yeah.
Like he died in 1950 something probably, right? And then like he was
World War
reborn.
II, it would have been
Yeah. And
40 and before 45.
Mhm.
yeah, so and then he was reborn probably what, 80s, 90s or something. You
Yeah.
know, I don't know. So I
Late
mean,
90s, because I said it started happening in
90s.
2000,
yeah,
so probably late 90s.
That's a pretty long
Yeah.
delay, and it doesn't seem like he had any intermittent life between
Yeah.
them, which is pretty cool. Like, you know, and he said he was like, he went to heaven, he met some people up there. I guess he hung out there for
Well, he was
years.
welcomed by his old.
Yeah.
Right. But
Exactly.
for 60 years, unless he came down and it was with a child or somebody who wasn't able to process, or
Well,
whose
I
family
feel-
kind of just placated him and said, okay, you've got an imaginary friend or whatever.
Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
conditioned it out of him.
Although he didn't remember that, you know, he remembered like dying, seeing people in heaven, and then seeing them in a hotel, and then like getting into the
Right.
kid. But like he doesn't remember anything in between those two things.
I recall,
Or he
and I
doesn't,
could be wrong, but I do recall that in Tibetan Buddhism, when you go through the stages of the bardo, and then if you're going to be reborn, that you do choose who you're going to be reborn to.
Cool. Huh.
So that was just interesting that came up in this
Interesting.
too.
But yeah, I always imagined it of like, you know, like you're dead and then within 24 hours you pop into
Yeah,
your
quick
body or something.
turnaround,
Yeah,
yeah.
but this is like and I, you know, I
Mhm.
guess part of what you hear too is potentially in the spirit world or whatever, like time is different, you know, like in the movie Interstellar too, even within our own world. If you go into the right scenarios, you have a certain amount of gravity applied to yourself, like time travels, goes at a different rate than for other people around you.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that's what explains that delay.
There's another, I mean, if people are interested, there's another video on YouTube called The Boy Who Fell Through the Earth or something like that, about a little boy in Scotland. And actually Bruce Grayson, who's also with DOPS, went over and researched that case. It's about an
What's DOPS?
Division of Perceptual Studies
Okay.
at the University of Virginia, which
Right.
Ian Stevenson started.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
One thing that was interesting is like at the end where he said, you know, where he said goodbye, and then he said like the spirit that I used to have in me has gone away.
Mhm.
That almost like sounds almost like it wasn't true reincarnation as, you know, as maybe we picture it, where it's like a soul enters the body and then like has a new life, but it almost has an overlap with like what you hear of like possession, you know, it's almost like,
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, now, the spirit of James M. Hughes
yeah,
for 60 years was somewhere,
yeah,
and then decided, all right, this couple in this pink hotel in
Yeah,
Hawaii,
yeah.
I think these are the people that are gonna,
yeah, I'm gonna hang out with them.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, and oh man, what was the point I wanted to go through? This is like mind-blowing stuff, but after, you know, I don't want to say exercise, they say goodbye to
Yeah.
James M. Hughes.
Yeah,
What happened to James M. Hughes? You know,
Well,
is he back
yeah, exactly.
in the, you know, looking around for
Yeah,
another
yeah,
set of
yeah.
parents?
No,
Or
no, because this is in alignment with what is said to happen in India, where the memories fade. So like the children are born with active memories of their
Yeah, I was
previous
thinking
life,
that too.
and then they
So you
fade.
think he was talking just symbolically, like, oh, he's gone, but what it really meant is just those memories are gone and like.
Right.
you know,
Yeah,
spirit.
well, I mean, clearly when they did that ritual, which was obviously a very powerful ritual for him, he was around the age where the memories would start to
Right.
fade.
and
Yeah.
And maybe going to the place
Naturally.
where he died was, maybe there was something also that occurred there.
Mhm.
Closure or whatever.
Mhm.
or if James M. Hughes, if there is some of him still in the little boy, if there's some kind of consciousness of James M. Hughes,
Yeah.
maybe he says, you know what, I'm messing with this kid, and maybe time to
Yeah,
go.
who knows? Yeah, there might be some overlap with, you know,
Yeah.
quote unquote
Yeah.
possession or whatever, or maybe it is more just kind of, maybe it's more just when,
Well-
you know, souls can
Right.
reincarnate and
And
transition.
now,
And they can choose to or not hold on to their memories. You know.
So
It just goes away.
if we're going with the traditional theories about reincarnation, so he was reincarnated into this young boy to accomplish something. Like he has some task that he has to do in this lifetime, so he can continue to move forward. So maybe that's why the memories fade, because if someone is too attached to their old identity, they
Yeah.
can't move forward.
Although at least according to his description of what happened, like, you know, he was chilling out in heaven for a while and like, didn't, you know, according to these other religions, that doesn't happen, right? Like you're just reincarnated and like it sucks until you stop being reincarnated and then you essentially go to heaven, right? But in this case, he said he was in heaven. He didn't say like, oh, it was beautiful.
Well,
and
we don't know
wonderful.
that it was heaven. It was just someplace.
Exactly, that's what I
where,
mean, yeah, but it'd be interesting to ask him, be like, hey, when you say heaven, you know, was it like amazing and beautiful and everything was cool and like you wish you could stay there forever, or was it just like drifting around in space or something and you know,
Yeah.
you wanted to go somewhere else? That would be interesting to ask, because that kind of helps answer that question, like,
Yeah.
you know, what
And
is
now James Leininger is probably in his mid-20s.
Mhm.
You know, if we're thinking he was born in the late 90s. And,
Yeah.
and in later interviews with him, which they're on YouTube, he says it's not a daily thing, but there is still, like, he can still recall, I guess he can
Yeah.
still feel that this is a presence with
Yeah.
him and that he's got, you know, another past.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But
that makes
he,
sense.
it's just not part of his daily life like it was when he was
Yeah.
a child.
Mhm.
I was kind of getting the feeling too that like, you know, if it kind of overlaps with like imaginary friends that kids have sometimes too. It's like his parents did this whole ceremony and they said like, time to say bye to this guy. You
Yeah,
know?
so he's obeying his parents.
Yeah, exactly. And he might even just be saying that, like, also he probably doesn't want this attention for the rest of his life being like, oh, the reincarnated kid, you know? So
Yeah.
like, even if he does fully remember all this stuff, he's gonna start saying like, oh yeah, I kind of remember it, but like not so much.
I
At
was,
the very least.
you know, it's funny, I was thinking that
Well,
when.
he has memories of like children have no memories really of their life. Like if we think of the brain, there's not unlimited storage in the brain. So
Yeah.
if you're reincarnated, you're going to have memories, like what's in your brain is your past life. But as you accumulate years in a new life, those memories are going to
Just get,
come
like,
and
rolled
crash
over,
out.
Naturally, of course, yeah. But like this, obviously this kid's memories of his past life were more powerful than the average person's memory
Right.
of his other
And then
past
plus,
life.
just like in a computer, you know, anything that you delete from a computer, anything that you write over in a computer is still on your computer.
Yeah, it's still
It's
there.
still there. I had a friend of mine was a digital forensic analyst, Garrett. I've talked about Garrett, and
Yeah.
Garrett's been here.
Yeah.
I was talking with him one time. We were having a similar discussion, and he said, "All right, Dan, take your computer. You know," he goes, "You wipe it clean." I said, if I don't want anybody getting any information from my hard drive, what do I do?"
Yeah.
He said, "Drill a couple holes in it, throw it in a microwave, cook it for as long as you want, rent a boat, go to the middle of the ocean and throw it in the salt water."
Yeah.
I said, "Oh yeah, that record?" He goes, "No,
Yeah.
I'm not done." He goes, "And then hope I don't find it. Because if I find it, I can have your bank account in like 5 minutes." He goes,
So-
"It's always there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Always there."
so-
So maybe
sort of.
online.
There's a really interesting caveat to that.
Yeah.
So there's studies that have been done on like accuracy of memories over time.
Mhm.
And actually what they found is the less often you recall a memory, the more accurate it is.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
like if you have a, you know, memory of something sometime in the park and like 30 years later, somebody asks you that and gets you to recall it, that recollection will be a lot more accurate than if every year along that timeline, they'd also ask you to recall it. Because every time you recall it, you actually edit it a little bit, then put it back in storage. When you
Right.
recall it, you pull it out of the hippocampus actually,
Okay.
to process it, then you put it back in.
And
So
it's
every
brand
time you
new.
do
It's a
that-
fresh file.
Not totally fresh, but there's always error involved, and it's always some portion of your current experience is getting tweaked into there and incorporated into that memory.
Yeah.
And that ties in too with like, you know, actual false memories that you've probably heard of that research where like, you know,
Implanted
exactly,
memories.
yeah, which often can be unintentional, but you can do intentionally too. And like they found that in police interrogations and stuff, that's where this research started. They're like, whoa, like you've gotten this guy to remember something that never actually happened, you know, when we actually looked at the evidence and everything. And the way that happens is you can do it in little tweaks. Like you say, you start with a real memory of like a time at the zoo. And then you can say, when you ask them to recall it, like, or when you read it back to them, be like, oh, last time you recalled it for us, you said, oh, there was a little girl that walked by with a red balloon, you know? And then like the next year, when you ask them to recall it again, you tell them like, last time you called it, there was a little girl with a red balloon and it was like a Mickey Mouse hat on top or something, you know?
Yeah.
So if you add these little tweaks, like then 10 years later, they will absolutely insist to you, like, no, there was a little girl that walked by with like the red balloon and Mickey Mouse hat on, even if that you absolutely
If it's
asserted
never
that
happened,
to memory
wow.
it. But they will insist that like you're lying to them if you tell them that that's not true and you asserted that.
Mhm.
I watched a
So-
really interesting documentary, I think it was on Netflix, about why people admit to things that they didn't do in like an interrogation like that.
Yeah,
And it was
yeah,
fascinating.
Yeah.
It was fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, the different methods that even some of the like detectives that might be questioning somebody, they're using methods and they don't even realize
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
using
They're
like
not necessarily doing it.
advanced, high
Yeah,
tech
It's,
interrogation
yeah,
methods.
yeah. I mean, like hypnosis, you know, you think of a stage hypnotist and they do make somebody do crazy things, but like essentially everything is hypnosis just on a spectrum. Like anytime you talk to somebody, like you use
Right.
the right words intentionally or not. And like, I mean, if you're having an argument and convince somebody, you essentially like hypnotize them to take your view, right? It's a fancy word for something that just means like convincing somebody of something and
Right.
changing their mind, you know? And
I,
there's a
I
huge
used
spectrum.
hypnosis to quit smoking.
Yeah, there you go.
And it was pretty cool. And he said, the hypnotist, the guy that I went to, Dr. Jeffrey Rose in New York, he was great.
Yeah.
But he said, I said, am I going to remember everything? He goes, you're absolutely going to remember
Yeah.
everything. He goes, I want you to remember everything because I'm telling you lots of stuff and I
Yeah.
want you to remember it.
Mhm.
He said, but hypnosis is, he goes, like you go to a movie and it's just
Exactly.
intense, focused concentration on
Yeah.
something and everything kind of drifts away.
Yeah.
He goes, that's
Flow.
like
It's like a
hypnosis,
flow state.
and it's funny to this day, it's been 20 years, this year is 20 years since I've had a cigarette. And it's amazing, I don't really Jones for a cigarette anymore, but things will pop in my head that he said.
Oh.
And
yeah.
it'll make you feel worse than better. That I hear
Yeah.
that all the time when I go, oh, I just had a drag.
Yeah.
And that his voice pops in my head and says, you know what? It's just gonna make you feel bad.
Yeah.
It's not gonna make you feel good.
Yeah, and he didn't, cast a spell on you when he did that. He literally
No.
just said words to you, and it had this impact.
He spoke to
So
me, and it's the rhythm
yeah
in
yeah.
which he speaks
There's
because
subtle, yeah,
it's really interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Have you guys ever been hypnotized?
I've
I
hypnotized other people, but I haven't been
Yeah.
hypnotized.
yeah. I
Mirror
also
gazing,
in my,
hypnotized might be cool.
Yeah, yeah. that's
oh
true.
yeah. Well, it's hypnotic, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
sort of exactly. That's the thing. Like it's a word, but there's such a huge spectrum of
Yeah.
you can do it to yourself, other people can do it to you. There's all kinds of essentially it's just suggestion of that something is the way it is, whether or not it is. And you can do that all the time to anybody to different degrees. Although some people are more inherently inclined to that state in certain periods of their life or just inherently just because of their personality, whatever. But you can actually bump people up within that scale. So there's like a scale, like I forget what the term is, but it's like the hypnotizability scale or whatever. And there's some standardized scales for that. And you can do tests to see how likely somebody is to be hypnotized. And you can actually bump people up on that scale by creating a scenario artificially in which all you're doing is you're just convincing them a little bit more that like hypnotism is a thing and they can be hypnotized. So they did an experiment where somebody would sit behind the table, somebody would come in and they would just do some basic like hypnosis stuff like, oh, so one of the techniques you can start with that helps you both assess somebody's hypnotizability and also kind of get them to start moving along those lines is like, it's always using something that is pre-existing and then trying to add something onto that to step them along this progression. So for instance, like if you clench your hands together right now, really tightly, okay, and now like really tightly, and then extend your two fingers out, two index fingers, and keep them apart. And as you stare at them over time, I'm putting a rubber band over the tips of your fingers. And that rubber band is getting tighter and tighter, and it's slowly drawing your fingers closer
It's happening.
and closer. Yeah, exactly. See? So but obviously, you're making use of the fact that like, yeah, exactly. That's the next step. Yeah. So you're making use of the fact that there is already a physical thing that's making you do that, the clenching of your hands together. Your fingers naturally want to drift together. And in fact, you were subconsciously resisting that at the beginning. And all I'm doing is getting you to kind of forget that resistance and let your fingers come together. And you thinking about the rubber band is helping that happen even more. So when that happens though, like you don't necessarily think about all those reasons why it worked. And so now you're a little bit more hypnotizable, right? So in this experiment, they did it in another way that was even kind of more clever. So the person sits behind the table, somebody comes in, they do all that kind of stuff, right? And then they end it with saying like, and now like you're going to notice that the room is becoming like a little bit more red in color, like all the colors are going to be more. And while they're doing that, they actually have a little foot trigger and they actually literally change the colors of the light in the room. And that, like, even if nothing else worked, the finger thing, nothing with that guy, all of a sudden they're like, whoa, something weird is happening. And they don't know, obviously, that's an experiment that the guy's messing with them.
Yeah.
And they get bumped up on that scale. So now if the next day you want to hypnotize them, like they're a lot more likely to get hypnotized. It's pretty cool. Yeah. So it's all that kind of thing. It's all using real things, and then you add something, a little tweak to it, then you use that again. It's like a feedback loop to just get them to move along further and further down until they're clucking like a chicken, like you're doing. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Hey, we have a question from Diane, who said to say it was great to see us, you and I, and great to hear you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Diane. Thanks
But
for coming.
Diane wants to know, Diane Retty, I'm sorry, I butchered your name. Are all the stories of reincarnation as intense? That little boy was so consumed with this identity. You know, I don't know if all of them were intense, but I would imagine that, you know, a lot of them are pretty intense.
Yeah.
Probably not. I mean, does reincarnation only happen with a tragic death? You know, this
Exactly.
James M. Hughes was only 21, I think they said, when he was shot down. So, you know, does he get a second chance because he was so young? And I would imagine a past life memory is pretty intense, regardless.
Unless your life was super boring and you died really in a boring, you know, he had a violent death. He was like flying airplanes and stuff. Like if you were a friggin' like vacuum salesman and you just like died in your sleep, like it's probably less likely to remember. It's less exciting, less dramatic, you know. It's like
It's kind of
I also want to say that the more culturally accepted and normal the idea of reincarnation is, I want to say the less intense the experience is going to be, because
that's true too.
his parents were, first of all, so upset because it seemed like he was in distress, and then they became very involved.
And they were open-minded and they encouraged him. They didn't condition him to like, oh, you're just imagining things. It was just a dream.
Although, at the beginning there was a lot of like, said excitement behind it, and they were asking questions and stuff. Meanwhile, it was just kind of like blasé, like, oh yeah, no
if
problem.
it happens,
Reincarnated.
if it's totally normal,
Exactly,
then I want to. There's probably less drama around it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, geez, it's 7:30 already.
Yeah.
That was pretty quick. We're gonna wrap it up. When's the next one, Matilda?
Oh, well, actually, we have to determine that.
Okay, so we're not exactly sure, but you'll get the Merchant's House will send you an invite, I'm sure, out to everybody that logged in tonight, and thank you for that.
I think June 23rd, if that works for you. It worked for me.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
So if that's a tentative date, then you should get an
June
email.
23rd.
Yeah,
Topic
June 23rd, and we're gonna surprise you with the topic.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everybody, but before we log off, again, we want to encourage everybody that was watching tonight to do what you can to help support the Merchant's House, especially in this fight against these evil, horrid developers who want to wreck the Merchant's House. That's what they want to do for profit for them, to line their pockets.
I have a small announcement about beginning after Memorial Day, the house will be open on Wednesdays.
That's not a small announcement. That's huge.
Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And over the course of the summer, I can't recall the dates offhand, there will be 3 Thursdays where the garden will be open in the evening, and we'll have tours and wine, and all of this will be on the website. But basically, the hours will be expanded beginning after Memorial Day.
That's great. And come on down to the Merchant's House and do what you can to help fight. Again, just take a tour and you'll come back. It's a beautiful, beautiful house. It is, it's remarkable. It's a time capsule, and it'll blow you away. It blew me away, and anybody I've brought here all say the same things. I want to come back in the daytime because I usually bring them here for a ghost hunt or a ghost tour.
Yeah, and actually keep an eye on the website, because the ghost tour tickets for October will go on sale probably in August.
Right, and they'll sell out. They'll
Yes,
sell
and
out
the tours
really,
that
really
you
quick.
do will sell out first.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah. But yeah, please do come by, take a tour, throw a couple bucks in the bird cage in front of the on your way out and support the Merchant's House. It really is a great place. Oh, hold on. I got a chat. Thank you so much for volunteering. And it's already, I can't wait for the next one. I was at the Merchant's House on a business trip. Thanks again from Vancouver, Canada. Vancouver, Canada, probably one of the most beautiful places on earth, coming in second, of course, to the Merchant's House. So we'll and of course sitting next to Matilda, you can't beat that. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we hope to see you here at the Merchant's House. All right, take care, be safe. That's Lee. So long.